This is Maggio at Studio Anavami in Santa Cruz with the podcast Marking into the Paradigm, an approach to creative process in the visual arts that begins to alter our perceptions of reality through expansion of our identity of being of the world rather than in the world. In the episode number 9, Language and Marking, we consider our relationship perception of the world through language. The marking images explore some of the concepts in this episode. In Japan, spiritual realization is acknowledged in terms of unseen forces. Brush calligraphy is not merely marks made with a brush, but rather a deep expression of energies coming through the hand, brush, ink, to the paper, silk, or wood. In ancient times, a way was designed to test enlightenment on a physical level. Masters were given the same brushes and inks to do calligraphy on a block of wood. The wood were then planed down to see how deeply the ink penetrated below the surface of the wood. This was a measure of ki, or life force, representing the realization of the master. These tests are still in use today, using scanning microscopy to examine the depths of the ink. Here the marking conveys something not readily seen, yet perceivable. Words and marks articulate nuanced perceptions. They can also distort experience and ideas. Like the parts of language where subtle expressions not seen can remain nameless, but important to the understanding. Language reflects habitual consciousness, yet in poetic expression, it can be the cutting edge of awareness not yet sayable, or what is said between the lines. Cultural values and sensitivities show up in language. Living in Japan, even when speaking one's native tongue with other foreigners, Japanese words were constantly used when there was no accurate translation. When there is no word, the meaning or expression is not available. Sometimes words are lost to cultural understanding, but other times they lay below the surface, rising when the cultural value needs them. When translating these more difficult ideas, it may mean we need to create new blended languages to communicate and conceptualize to increase our understanding. One example lies in the physicality of Japan. Being a small island, culture creates a particular relationship to space. Words are used to mark the beauty of space as well as empty space, but the potentiality of space, and to describe everyday static space in both dynamic and temporal terms. What we might call empty space or negative space, the Japanese concept of notan presents as actively informing what is around it. This perception dramatically changes the concept of the flat picture plane. That is how we see it in the West. We have found in our marking practice that refining meaning in everyday words helps us to become more aware of our perceptions. Language can limit our ways of perceiving when we bypass body responses for mental ideas and belief structures. We discussed this in episode 3, Joy and Happiness, where we define these two words for our use in the studio and reconstructed our habitual pattern of perceiving. In the episode 4, Mouse, we talked about how laboratory tests show that fear limits creativity. How we perceive the world comes from both how we define the concepts and what emotional state we are in when those concepts are formed. Sometimes we must use words in new ways to convey experience not acknowledged in the vernacular. Martin Buber introduces God as a verb, which redefines object to action. Henri Corbin defines the difference between imaginal fabrication and the imaginal realm from the context of altered states in Sufi mysticism. Nora Bateson maintains that our use of systems is too narrow band, arising from mechanical models. She enlarges the concept of systems to include a mutual exchange of resources with the model of nature, with intelligence and adaptability. Her word is semanticy. Stephen Busby of Findhorn turns the noun world into worlding, because world is not a place, but an activity, an active exchange. Worlding is what we do as we create and are created by world. In our markings, we have harnessed these ideas to gain greater sensitivity somatically as we become more cognizant of our words. We have highlighted worlding because of the suggestion of removing the boundaries between subject and environment, which harks back to the concept of notan. Heidegger, in his philosophical reflections, discuss worlding as a way to experience the world as familiar. In this way, he suggests that we have a role in world making. By dropping the segments of the linear, we bring it near in intimacy and as a sense of responsibility and inclusion. Intimacy, from the Latin intimus, means inmost or impress, which brings us directly to marking. We have seen in our marking adventure that our bodily emotions and feelings respond to marks as well as express marks. They are connectors, binding us to a greater container. When we consistently separate ourselves from what we perceive as outer and inner, we are not able to be intimate with our world. Our structure of reality names it as other, and thus never allows us to attain even the smallest part. That removal sets us up to feel unsteady. Our paradigm may be neatly packaged, but it lacks coherence. When we get to the edge of the glue of belief, where it runs thin, intimacy is lost, and we are left adrift without the words to articulate. Language has many lenses, whether political or poetic, spinning the context beyond the content. That is the substance beyond the frame. Our postmodern society often uses the lens of psychology to look at the world. The goal of psychology as a scientific study of the mind and behavior is to understand mental processes and brain functions. Psychology's view and jargon in our culture has come to dominate spirituality with concepts like mindfulness use for pain reduction, yoga as a body therapy, and art as a diagnostic or interpretive tool. Many of the deepest experiences of a creative process are labeled pathological or disassociation, where in many cultures and times, disassociation was part of the creative process. This view of art is highly constricted. The creative process deconstructs as well as constructs. Putting back together in innovative ways the fabric has been torn and frayed is part of what the artist does. All artists, poets, musicians. These explorations and experimentations invite a new coherence. Hair, or his, from the Latin means to stick. Adhere is a fundamental process to our marking process as we take apart and put back together. We want more than to adhere in our markings. We want to cohere. Cohere is to have a quality of soundness, clarity, lucidity. It may be more difficult in the everyday function realm to cut up and put back together, but with art materials, you can go beyond the physical. As in poetry, the not physical seen contributes through metaphor, adding the invitation of intimacy. Beyond even folk art and spontaneous dancing and singing and rites of passage, art has a deeper cultural function. The overfocus of the individual can point to an innate need for participation of the community. What if art is not a product, but a process? A process inherent to social evolution. What if art practice is to step out of societal confinement and expectations? Through somatic engagement, we have intimately into the world of being. That is, through somatic engagement, we have moved intimately into the world of beingness with the innate understanding that our life on the planet is exchange. The arts in all realms at their center are reciprocal. So thank you for participating in this podcast, for considering that creative living might mean challenging habitual ways of looking at the world and our place in it.